It was a crisp autumn morning at JFK Airport, and the terminal buzzed with the usual chaos of travelers rushing to catch their flights. Among them was Richard Lawson, a high-profile corporate executive who had spent his life climbing the ranks of the business world. Dressed in an impeccable suit, he carried himself with an air of arrogance, believing that money and power commanded respect wherever he went. Richard was headed to Los Angeles for a major business deal that would solidify his status in the industry. As he made his way to the first-class lounge, he couldn't help but sneer at the economy passengers who looked exhausted and disheveled. "Peasants," he muttered under his breath, adjusting his designer watch. Upon boarding the plane, Richard settled into his luxurious first-class seat, stretching his legs and basking in the comfort of the exclusive section. A flight attendant approached him with a warm smile, offering him a glass of champagne. "Sir, would you like anything else before takeoff?" "No, just keep it coming," Richard said with a smug grin. A few moments later, a man quietly took the seat beside him. He wore a simple black t-shirt, ripped jeans, and a pair of well-worn sneakers. His long hair fell past his shoulders, and his face was partially hidden behind a pair of sunglasses. Richard took one glance at him and rolled his eyes. "Great, they let anyone in here these days," he muttered under his breath, making sure his disapproval was evident. The man beside him, who seemed unfazed by Richard's obvious disdain, simply smiled and offered a polite nod. "Hey there. Hope we have a smooth flight." Richard smirked. "Yeah, sure. Don't get too comfortable, though. First class isn't exactly for casual travelers." The stranger chuckled softly. "Well, I like to travel comfortably when I can." Richard shook his head and turned his attention to his tablet, scrolling through stock reports and emails. "People like you should stick to coach," he mumbled. As the plane taxied to the runway, Richard continued to make sarcastic remarks under his breath, but the stranger remained composed and kind. Soon, the plane lifted off, and Richard sank into his seat, closing his eyes. A few hours into the journey, turbulence struck. The plane shook violently, causing some passengers to panic. Richard's hands clenched the armrests, his face turning pale. "What the hell?" he stammered. The man beside him remained calm, gently placing a reassuring hand on Richard's shoulder. "Don't worry, turbulence is normal. Just breathe." Richard pushed his hand away, clearly irritated. "I don't need advice from some washed-up musician or whatever you are." The stranger leaned back and smiled. "Fair enough." As the flight continued, passengers began to notice the mysterious man in first class. Whispered murmurs spread through the cabin, and Richard, curious, overheard snippets of conversation. "Is it really him? I think it is. No way, Keanu Reeves wouldn't fly commercial." Richard's heart sank. He turned slowly to his seatmate, suddenly realizing who he had been insulting for the past few hours. The kind, unassuming man beside him was none other than the globally beloved actor, Keanu Reeves. Richard's mouth went dry. "Wait, you're Keanu Reeves?" Keanu smiled humbly. "Guilty as charged." A wave of embarrassment washed over Richard, and he fumbled to recover. I didn't realize. I thought, you were just some guy." Keanu chuckled. "I am just some guy. I like flying under the radar when I can." Richard tried to make up for his earlier behavior by asking Keanu about his movies and career. Keanu, being the humble person he was, turned the conversation around and asked Richard about his work and life. As their conversation continued, Richard found himself opening up. He talked about his struggles, his ambitions, and his fear of failure. Keanu listened intently, offering thoughtful advice and encouragement. Keanu said, "Success isn't just about money and power. It's about being kind, being humble, and making a difference in people's lives." The conversation took a deep turn, with Keanu sharing his own struggles and hardships, losing loved ones, battling personal demons, and finding meaning beyond fame. Richard was mesmerized, realizing how much they had in common despite their vastly different worlds. Mid-flight, an elderly woman seated nearby began experiencing health issues. Flight attendants rushed to assist, and Keanu immediately jumped up to help, offering his support and calming the distressed passengers around them. Richard watched in awe, realizing how effortlessly Keanu took control of the situation with compassion and grace. Seeing this, Richard felt compelled to help as well. He called out to the attendants, offering his business connections to secure immediate medical assistance upon landing. For the first time in a long time, he felt useful beyond the confines of his job. Throughout the rest of the flight, Keanu continued interacting with passengers, sharing light-hearted stories and making everyone feel at ease. Richard found himself joining in, laughing, and for once, feeling a part of something beyond his usual work life. As the flight crew announced their descent, Richard felt like a changed man. He looked around at the other passengers and, for the first time, saw them not as peasants, but as fellow human beings, each with their own dreams and struggles. When they landed, Richard watched as Keanu patiently waited with the other passengers, helping an elderly woman with her luggage and giving a heartfelt goodbye to the flight attendants. Richard took a deep breath and approached Keanu. "Hey, Keanu. I just wanted to say thanks. You've given me a lot to think about." Keanu smiled and patted his shoulder. "Glad to hear it, man. Remember, it's never too late to change." As Richard walked away, he felt lighter, as though a burden had been lifted. That flight had changed something in him. It was a lesson he wouldn't forget. True greatness lies not in wealth or fame, but in how we treat those around us. Later that evening, Richard found himself calling an old friend he hadn't spoken to in years. For the first time in a long time, he was ready to make amends and embrace a new perspective on life.